"Get off the bench, blind girl. That piano's not a toy." The words cut through the room like a slap. 4 laughter followed, not loud, just sharp enough to sting. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because that night, the girl no one believed in. She sat down and played something that would make an entire school go silent and cry. This is the story of Isabel Reyes, and the sound she created in a world that refused to see her. The first day at Brookshire Academy was supposed to feel like a new beginning, but for Isabel Reyes, it felt like walking into a storm with no umbrella, no sight, and no one to hold her hand. She stepped through the front gates, holding her white cane in one hand, the other clutching the strap of a worn-out backpack. Her posture was upright, her steps cautious but determined. Still, she could feel it, the silence. Not the silence of a respectful welcome, but that cold, heavy kind, the kind that follows judgmental stares and whispered mockery. Brookshire Academy was one of the most prestigious private schools in the country, tuition most families wouldn't earn in a year. Isabel didn't pay a cent. She was there on a scholarship, and that alone, to some, made her unwelcome. Her blindness, that made her invisible. And when you're both poor and blind, you're an anomaly that people don't know how to look at, so they pretend you're not there at all. She heard the click of heels on polished floors, the laughter of girls who'd never had to wonder if they belonged. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, are you lost?" A girl with a polished tone, probably blonde, probably wearing expensive perfume, probably smirking. Isabel turned toward the voice. "No, I'm new." A beat of silence. Then a quiet, "Oh," followed by retreating footsteps and muffled laughter. She made her way down the hallway, guided by the sound of her cane tapping against the marble floor. Every footstep echoed like a reminder, "You don't belong here." In the classroom, no one said her name. The teacher didn't offer a welcome. He simply said, "There's an empty seat in the back." She could feel the eyes on her, measuring her, doubting her, writing her off. And yet, she took her seat. Unshaken on the outside, torn to pieces on the inside, lunchtime came like a punishment. The dining hall was alive with energy. And yet, Isabel sat alone. She reached into her bag and pulled out a foil-wrapped sandwich made by her abuela that morning. It smelled of home, beans, cilantro, and love. She listened to the conversations around her. Soccer teams, summer in the Hamptons, designer backpacks. No one said a word to her, not even a hello. She didn't cry. She wouldn't, but she felt it. That heavy burn behind her eyes, the one that comes when your soul is bruised but you're too proud to bleed. At night, back in the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother in the Bronx, she didn't mention the stairs, didn't talk about the silence, didn't explain how the world felt like it was screaming that she didn't matter. She just smiled and said, "School was fine, abuela." But later, long after her grandmother had gone to bed, Isabel sat at her little keyboard in the corner of the room. The plastic keys were yellowed. Some stuck a little, but her fingers moved with purpose. She played a melody she couldn't read on sheet music. She played it from memory, from feeling, from pain. Each note was a word she hadn't said. Each chord, a cry no one heard. And in that moment, she wasn't invisible. She was alive. She was real. Brookshire's hallways were bright, cold, and filled with noise, voices echoing off stone walls, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking. But to Isabel, they felt like tunnels of silence. She heard everything, but nothing was for her. No one said good morning. No one walked beside her. Some days, she wasn't even sure if anyone remembered she was there. In literature class, when the teacher assigned partners, no one offered. In gym, she was given a chair in the corner, as if her body didn't deserve to move. In music class, the teacher spoke of the classics with reverence, but never asked if Isabel liked music. He assumed she couldn't even hear it the way others did, but she did. She didn't just hear it. She felt it. Every vibration, every nuance, every breath between notes. Her fingers knew what others' eyes had to be told. On the third day of school, Isabel sat alone beneath a tree during lunch, the sun warm on her face, wind brushing gently against her curls. She pressed the play button on her old voice recorder, a small silver device that had belonged to her mother before the accident. The tape crackled. Then came a voice, faint but full of warmth. "Mia, just because you can't see stars doesn't mean they're not shining for you." It was her mother's voice, recorded when Isabel was 5. She listened to that tape more often than she admitted, because even if the world refused to speak to her, this voice still remembered her name. That night, back home, Isabel sat once again at her keyboard. Her grandmother had gone to bed early, tired from working double shifts at the diner. Isabel didn't need lights. She didn't need sheet music. She didn't need permission. She let her fingers find the keys, weaving together sounds the way some people speak, hesitant at first, then steady, then spilling over like emotion too big to hold back. She played a song she had never heard, one that didn't exist in books or radios. It was a song about walking down a hallway where no one says your name. It was about sitting in silence while everyone else gets chosen. It was about pretending to be fine so the person who loves you doesn't worry. But mostly, it was about holding on to yourself when no one else does. Outside, the city breathed its usual lullaby, horns, sirens, subway rumbles. But inside that little apartment in the Bronx, a blind girl was composing a rebellion, not with fists, not with speeches, with music, raw, unpolished, real. And though no one at Brookshire knew it yet, Isabel Reyes was about to change everything. Friday morning came with rain, soft and steady, tapping against the windows of Brookshire like a secret trying to be heard. Isabel entered the music room early, as usual. She sat quietly in the back, hands folded, waiting to be ignored. But this time, she wasn't. Not by him. The door creaked open and the room stilled. Footsteps, confident, expensive, slow, approached. "Miss Reyes," said a voice smooth as silk and sharp as a blade. It was Headmaster William Harrington, the man who ran Brookshire like a kingdom built on legacy and appearances. He had a voice trained in debate clubs and Ivy League lecture halls, a voice used to being obeyed. Isabel straightened instinctively. Her grandmother had warned her, "People like him don't talk to girls like us unless they have something to gain." "I hear you play piano," he said, a thin smile in his voice. "Yes," Isabel replied quietly. "How delightful," he said, drawing out the syllables. "We have a very special gala next week. Parents, donors, some of our most distinguished alumni will be there. I'd like you to open the event, a solo performance." Isabel blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "You want me?" "Indeed," he replied, almost too quickly. "It would be inspirational." She recognized the word for what it was, a cage wrapped in ribbon. He didn't want music, he wanted a spectacle. A blind scholarship girl fumbling on stage in front of New York's elite, a cautionary tale dressed up as inclusion. "Still," she said softly, "okay." As he turned to leave, Harrington added with fake warmth, "Oh, and be sure to practice. That Steinway is delicate, wouldn't want any accidents, would we?" The door closed behind him, leaving only silence. But Isabel heard the real message. Don't embarrass us. Don't make a sound we haven't approved. Don't dare shine. That night, Isabel didn't touch the keyboard. She lay on her bed, facing the ceiling, ears filled with the city's muffled static. She could feel the weight of it, their expectations, their judgment, the quiet hope in her grandmother's eyes. Was she strong enough to stand in front of them? Was she ready to fail or to fight? She didn't know yet, but somewhere far inside her chest, a flame flickered. Not confidence, not defiance. Just the quiet, desperate need to be heard on her own terms. The next evening, when the city had quieted just enough to hear its own heartbeat, Isabel sat at the edge of her bed, barefoot and still. The apartment was dim, her grandmother sleeping in the next room, a radio murmuring soft boleros from the kitchen counter. She reached for her white cane, not with hesitation, but with intention. Down 3 flights, past the mailboxes, into the basement, a place no one wanted but she had claimed as her own. There, covered in a sheet of dust and rusted dreams, stood a battered old keyboard, missing 1 leg, 1 key permanently stuck, but to Isabel it was alive. She sat on the upturned milk crate, adjusted the small speaker she'd borrowed from a neighbor, and placed her hands over the chipped keys. She didn't start with scales. She didn't warm up. She closed her eyes, not because she had to, but because it helped her hear more clearly. She let her fingers hover, then fall, and then sound. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was hers. She began to build the piece she'd play at the gala, not from Mozart or Chopin, but from her own scars. It was the sound of her mother's voice in that old recording, the ache of empty hallways, the hum of subway brakes at midnight, the hush in a room full of people who pretend not to see you. It was everything she never said out loud, pressed into melody. And the more she played, the more she remembered. That music was not about applause. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. Hours passed unnoticed. Her fingers ached. Her back throbbed, but her soul felt lighter. Above her, the Bronx slept. Below, a blind girl wrote a song that would not ask for permission. When she finally climbed back upstairs, dawn was bleeding into the sky. Her grandmother stood by the stove, spooning hot chocolate into 2 mugs. "You stayed up again," she said, not angry, just knowing. "I had to," Isabel replied. And for the first time that week, her voice didn't tremble. The night of the gala arrived, dressed in gold. Brookshire Academy gleamed with string lights and white roses. The auditorium, once cold and hollow, was transformed into a cathedral of performance, perfection, and pride. Parents arrived in tailored suits and satin gowns. Donors shook hands over flutes of champagne. Photographers clicked silently from the corners, documenting wealth in motion. Backstage, Isabel sat alone, her cane resting across her knees, her heart pounding like a distant drum. She wore the best outfit she had, an ironed white blouse and a navy skirt her grandmother had taken in by hand. No designer labels, no jewelry, but she wore it with dignity. A few feet away, Headmaster Harrington held a glass of wine and a microphone. He stepped onto the stage, his voice booming with curated warmth. "Good evening, esteemed guests, families, and friends of Brookshire Academy. Tonight, we begin with something special." He let the word sit, sweet, sticky, and sharp. "A performance from one of our newest students, a young lady who reminds us that courage can be found in the unlikeliest of places." A soft wave of polite laughter rippled through the room. Harrington smiled wider, then nodded toward the wings. "Please welcome Isabel Reyes." The lights turned, the room quieted. Isabel stood. Her cane tapped softly as she made her way to the grand Steinway, the piano that lived at the center of Brookshire's cultural pride. Its black surface gleamed under the lights. To everyone watching, it was a sacred instrument. To Isabel, it was simply a piano, no more holy than the battered one in her basement. She placed her hand on the bench, found her seat, let her fingers touch the keys, and then she paused. She breathed. The room held its breath with her. She began with a single note, soft, uncertain, then another and another. The melody began to form itself, like a memory being pulled from under years of silence. It was not grand. It was not what the audience expected. It was quiet, honest, raw. The music told a story of silence, of cold hallways, of nights spent in a basement with only a broken keyboard and a head full of dreams. It told the truth, and no one was ready for it. By the end, no one clapped. Not because they weren't moved, but because they were. because for the first time they had been asked not to admire, but to feel. Then, softly, a single pair of hands began to clap. A woman in the second row, a donor, then another, then a third, until the room rose to its feet, not in politeness, not in pity, but in awe. Backstage, Harrington stood frozen. He hadn't seen a performance. He'd witnessed a revolt. A girl he thought was a prop had just stolen the entire room, and she'd done it without needing to see a single face. The next morning, the applause still rang in Isabel's ears, soft, distant, like a dream she wasn't sure had been real. But by the time she reached the campus gates, Brookshire had already returned to normal. The hallways still gleamed, the laughter still echoed, and the cold air around her was back. No one said, "You were amazing." No one smiled. No one looked. In the music room she heard it first, a whisper, then another. She just got lucky. Someone probably helped her rehearse. I bet they felt bad for her. Isabel kept her head high, but something inside her tightened. She went to the music room that afternoon, hoping maybe that the Steinway would be unlocked again. It wasn't. The door was locked. No explanation, no key. She asked the receptionist if there had been a schedule change. The woman said, without looking up, "Must have been a mistake on your access form. Sorry." But it wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning. Days passed. Her name disappeared from the practice schedule. The school's internal newsletter didn't mention her performance. Someone deleted her audio file from the shared music drive. Her headphones went missing from her locker. Her cane was once found taped shut. Little things, petty things. But they stung, because they were so carefully done in secret. Not loud attacks, quiet cruelty. One day after class, Isabel found a sticky note on her desk. It said just 3 words, "Stay in line." She crumpled it slowly, didn't cry, didn't report it, just sat with it in her palm, like a piece of truth no one else would admit. That night, she didn't play. She sat by the keyboard, hands hovering, but the music wouldn't come. She felt not just hurt, she felt erased. But then came a knock. Her grandmother. She stepped inside the room quietly, a cup of warm tea in her hand. "Isabel," she said, placing it gently on the nightstand, "you don't fight shadows with shadows." Her voice was calm, but firm. "You fight them by staying lit." And so Isabel picked up her recorder, pressed play on the voice of her mother, then reached for the keys, not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. The storm didn't come all at once. It came in whispers, sideways glances, a feeling in the air, something was brewing, and it had Isabel Reyes at the center. Ms. Morales, the school's quiet music teacher, had watched everything. She'd seen the performance that silenced a room. She'd noticed the missing equipment, the sudden rule changes, the locked doors, and she'd had enough. One afternoon, she stopped Isabel outside class. "Would you be interested," she asked carefully, "in playing again?" Isabel blinked. "At another gala?" "No," said Miss Morales with a half-smile, "at something real." That evening, Isabel was led down a hallway she'd never explored, into the back garden of the school. It wasn't landscaped or polished, just patchy grass, old wooden benches, and a small cement patio tucked beneath the trees. It was perfect. Over the next week, plans took shape, quietly. No announcements, no emails, just whispers passed between lockers, notes slid under desks, nods exchanged in hallways. A group of students, some musicians, some painters, a few dancers, started gathering after hours. They called it the real stage. And it would happen on the same night as Brookshire's annual showcase, an event that had, once again, excluded Isabel entirely. Harrington didn't know. He was too busy preparing his scripted perfection. But while the stage lights were being hung in the auditorium, a borrowed microphone was being taped to a wooden stool under the trees. The students found a forgotten upright piano in a basement storeroom. They wheeled it out, covered in dust, missing a few hammers, but still standing. It was not a Steinway, but it was free. One of the theatre kids brought fairy lights. A visual arts student painted a small banner, "Truth needs no curtain." Someone found an old amp, and every piece, every tiny effort was stitched together, not by rebellion, but by recognition. They saw in Isabel what no one else had dared to, a mirror. The night before the performance, Isabel stood in the garden alone. She ran her fingers over the piano. The wood was rough, the keys uneven, the sound flawed, but it was hers. No permission, no polish, just space, to be, to feel, to play. And somewhere, beyond the hedges and spotlighted windows of the main hall, Brookshire's empire of perfection was about to tremble. Friday night arrived like a breath held too long. Inside Brookshire's grand auditorium, chandeliers glowed. Velvet curtains draped the stage. A student jazz trio warmed up near the baby grand. The headmaster, in a tailored tux, shook hands and laughed too loudly. Everything gleamed. Everything was controlled. Everything was safe. But outside, beyond the hedges and floral arrangements, something else was happening, something real. The back garden, once forgotten, was now flickering with string lights and candles in mason jars. A banner hung between two trees. The real stage. Art without permission. Word had spread. Not just to students, not just to a few brave teachers, but to parents, reporters, even some of the donors who'd grown tired of speeches and status. They came with curiosity. They stayed for the feeling. And there, at the center of it all, was Isabel, not hidden, not shoved to the end of a program, but invited, expected, honored. She sat at the upright piano, its paint chipped and keys uneven. But to Isabel, it was alive. She ran her fingers across the surface, breathed in the night air, listened to the wind move through the trees like applause waiting to happen. No microphone, no stage hands, just her. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Then as she played, it wasn't the same song she'd performed at the gala. This was new. This was the answer to every whisper, every insult, every closed door. The melody started soft, almost invisible. Then it grew. It soared. It spoke. The audience didn't just hear it. They felt it in their ribs, in their throats, in the things they hadn't dared say out loud. This wasn't background music. This wasn't a talent show. This was a declaration that she belonged, that she mattered, that she had always been more than what they saw or refused to see. By the end, no one moved. Even the air seemed afraid to break the spell. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. A student, then a teacher. Then the entire garden rose to their feet, not out of duty, out of awe. Inside, Headmaster Harrington paused mid-sentence as the sound of cheers from outside filtered in. His face went still. He turned to the window, eyes narrowing, realizing far too late he hadn't just lost control of a student, he had lost control of the narrative. The garden performance went viral faster than anyone expected. A parent's video clip hit social media by sunrise. By noon, it was on local news. By evening, reporters were calling Brookshire for comments. But the headmaster's office? Silent. Behind its thick oak doors, William Harrington boiled. The concert hadn't just embarrassed him. It had exposed him. He had paraded Isabel as a novelty. He had locked her out. And now, she was the face of something bigger than him. Monday morning, a note awaited Isabel at the front office. Meeting. Headmaster's office. 3 p.m. Her heart stuttered, but she folded the paper, nodded to the receptionist, and walked back to class. No one said anything, but everyone saw. At 3 sharp, Isabel sat across from Harrington, cane laid gently across her lap. The office smelled like leather and money. Books with gold lettering lined the shelves, most unread. A grandfather clock ticked with the rhythm of authority. He didn't smile this time. "Miss Reyes," he said, fingers steepled, "you've caused quite the stir." Isabel said nothing. "You must understand, public displays without school approval violate policy. Using school property without permission is grounds for disciplinary action." Still, she remained silent, but her fingers gripped the armrests, tight, knuckles white. Harrington leaned in. "You're talented, Isabel. No one's denying that. But there are ways things are done here, traditions, boundaries. Perhaps next time you'll consider working within them." He paused. "Silence isn't strength, you know." She finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but unshaking. "Sometimes it's the only thing people listen to." That night, Harrington made his move. A formal notice went out. All students and faculty who participated in unauthorized performances would be reviewed by the school's disciplinary board. Teachers who had helped Miss Morales, Mr. Jacobs, were placed under investigation. Isabel was warned she was on thin ice. But something was different this time. The school community didn't stay silent. Parents wrote letters. Alumni posted support online. A group of students drafted a petition, gathering hundreds of signatures in a day. Even teachers who hadn't participated started to speak up. And then the board got involved. Brookshire's Board of Trustees, alarmed by the media coverage and rising public pressure, called for an internal investigation into the administration's actions. For the first time in years, Harrington wasn't untouchable. He was under scrutiny. And Isabel Reyes was not alone anymore. The investigation was swift. Emails were uncovered, footage reviewed, testimonies taken from students, teachers, and even custodial staff who had watched in silence for years. The story was clear. A girl had been underestimated, excluded, targeted, and when she found her voice, they tried to erase her again. But this time, the world had been watching. On a rainy Thursday morning, Brookshire Academy announced the immediate removal of Headmaster William Harrington. No applause, no goodbye ceremony, just a notice, and an empty office. By Friday, things had already begun to change. Students walked the halls a little differently, some with wider eyes, others with straighter backs. The administration reinstated Miss Morales and launched a new initiative, the Open Stage Project, a monthly student-led performance open to everyone, with no audition gates. And at the center of the launch gala, the school unveiled something no one had expected, a plaque. It sat beside the old upright piano in the garden, now carefully restored and housed under a glass pavilion. It read, "The Isabel Reyes Piano, let the unheard be heard." Isabel was invited to play that night. She wore the same white blouse, same cane, same calm, but this time she didn't walk in alone. Her grandmother held her arm, guiding her to the bench as the crowd, students, faculty, donors, strangers, waited in reverent silence. She sat, took a breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and played, not a song of pain, not a song of resistance, a song of light, of morning, of beginnings. When the last note faded into the night air, the garden stayed quiet for a beat, as if even the trees were listening. Then the applause came, not just loud, but long. Not because she had defied the odds, but because, finally, they saw her not as a miracle, but as a musician. That night, as she and her grandmother walked home under the stars, her abuela whispered, "You didn't just play music, mi niña. You opened a door." Isabel smiled, tilting her head to the sky she could not see, but always believed was there. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she had never needed to see the stars to know she was becoming one.